Hello everyone, this is Dantas here from the Zero to Hero Academy. Over the years we have helped multiple professionals either get into the Power Platform market or some of the seasoned professionals within the industry up their game within the low-code technologies. And we are here to announce that we have a special program coming up between March 19th and May 30th. This is the Power Pages and AI Zero to Hero Mentorship Program. Join us, click on the link, access the lessons. You know how we do it. Live lessons on Teams, and then the recorder goes up to YouTube and you can follow if you are in different time zones, but we prefer it to join it live. Connect, ask questions. So go ahead, invite your colleagues, your dad, your mom, your grandpa. Let's everybody join the fun. All right, we'll see you there. Take care.
On any of those platforms, always happy to chat with people about Power Pages. So, what are we going to do here today? We're going to talk about what do I mean by content authoring. We're going to look at what are the options for content authoring, because there are more than a couple. Then we'll talk about why does content make ALM tricky. So when we talk about ALM, we're talking about application lifecycle management, and more specifically in this case, moving our work from dev to test to prod. And so something that's a little bit unique about Power Pages is that it's a website that contains this content. And so we'll talk about why is that a little bit different compared to maybe other aspects of the Power Platform in terms of our ALM. Then, of course, our theme is we're all talking about AI. So how can Copilot help us with our content authoring? So we'll talk about that as well today. And then there'll be more time on Thursday as well. We'll talk about some more more in depth on ALM and some of the strategies we can use as kind of pro devs to make ALM a little bit easier. So that's our agenda for today. Feel free to drop any questions that you might have in the chat. Happy to answer those, and any of the moderators, if there's questions there that I'm ignoring, feel free to interrupt me and bring those up. So happy to take those questions as well. Okay, so what do we mean by content authoring? So what we're talking about here are doing things like adding new pages, editing the text and images that appear on the pages, changing the links. That's what we mean by content authoring. So at least in this particular session anyways. So when we look at what are the underlying tables in Dataverse that we're actually interacting with, the big one would be web pages. That's usually what we're doing when we're creating new pages on our site. We're dealing with web pages. Web files, so if we're uploading images or if we're uploading documents in different formats, we can use web files. We've got web link sets, which are often used for our navigation elements. And then we've also got content snippets, which are ways of kind of putting in little kind of discrete elements of text or images into our site that can be easily content managed. So, again, when we talk about content authoring, I'm separating this from the building, the first building of the Power Pages site. So when we talk about building a bunch of lists and forms and kind of building the functionality of the site, that's a separate topic. What we're talking about today is how are we controlling the text and the images and the pages of content that might appear across our Power Pages site. So often when we have our kind of different roles in the project, the person who is maybe updating the content might be more on the marketing side of the business and less on the technical side of the business. So what that means is that the developer of the site needs to consider that role might be held by someone who's maybe not as technical. So again, that's something we'll get into a little bit more on Thursday, where we talk about what are those techniques that developers can use to make content authoring easier for content authors. So what do I not mean by content authoring? So what we're not going to talk about here is creating lists and forms. That's building out the functionality of your portal, of your Power Pages site. So we're not really going to be talking about, how do I create a list? How do I create a form? How do I write Liquid? How do I write JavaScript? How do I use the web API? That's not really what we're going to be looking at. We are going to be looking at how do we, because one of the challenges, as we'll see, is that the content and these other things that we're not talking about are often all jumbled up and mixed together. So how do we kind of properly separate those and properly manage those separately? But we're not going to be talking about actually creating lists or forms or Liquid or JavaScript or web API or anything like that in our session specifically. We're going to be purely focused on the adding of text and images and pages to the site, but no kind of functionality that ties directly back to other kind of Dataverse data or anything like that. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So when we talk about actually editing the content of our Power Pages site, what are the options? Well, like I said, there's more than one. I've got 5 listed here because Power Pages is built on top of Dataverse, and Dataverse has a very robust API. There's really kind of no limit to what are the options. Someone in theory could build their own special tool for interacting with the content that exists in Power Pages. Essentially, all of the content that we'll be talking about resides directly in Dataverse. So when we're talking about creating pages or files or adding text, that text is, or all that data is stored directly in Dataverse. So all of these different interfaces that we have on the screen here, they're all different interfaces for essentially modifying that data that exists in Dataverse. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually just going to poke around and look at what some of these different interfaces look like and what they allow us to do. So I'm going to start off with, I'm going to maybe just reset here, go back to make.powerpages.microsoft.com. And what we're going to start off with is the most common interface, the interface that Microsoft has been working on for the last few years. This is the primary interface for interacting with content on your Power Pages site, and that is the Power Pages Design Studio. So how do we get there? We go to make.powerpages.microsoft.com, and that will take us to the list of all the Power Pages sites that we have in our particular environment. And I'm going to be using this NH Power Apps Portals site right here. So to get to the Power Pages Design Studio, all we got to do here is click the edit button, and we're into the studio. Now, again, the studio is used for different purposes. Okay, yeah, I'm okay editing the site here. So the studio is meant for the developers of the site, and again, that doesn't necessarily mean pro code or low code. Anyone who's kind of building the functional pieces of the site, using the lists, using the forms, that sort of thing. The design studio is meant for that, but it's also can be used by content authors. So the people who are adjusting the text of the website, people who are adding pages of content, people adding documents and files, things that people should be able to access via the website, that can be done through the Power Pages Design Studio. So most of what we're going to be talking about here resides in this Pages workspace. So along the left-hand side here, you can see that I have a whole bunch of pages. We've got other pages. We've got main navigation. And so this is the interface where we can create new pages or edit the content of an existing page. I'm just going to let Copilot go away here just for a second. So the interface here, essentially Microsoft has been, evolving the Design Studio a few times now since they've acquired the product from ADX Studio. The Design Studio is something that's new as part of the Microsoft offering. We'll talk about in a second what the kind of the legacy version of the editing experience was like. But the Design Studio, kind of on its second version now, there's a new version of it as part of the kind of the rebranding to Power Pages. And like I said, the ability to view all the pages here on the left-hand side, and the ability to create new pages. So if I want to create a new page here, let's just call this new content page. I then have the ability to decide whether I want to add it to the main navigation, and that's going to decide whether it's in this main navigation section here or in the other pages. I then also have the ability to choose between different layouts. So whether I want basically a blank one, a landing page, subpage, as well as the ability here to create my own custom layouts. And this is done using different kind of web templates. For now, I'm just going to start from a blank one. Okay, new content page. I'll uncheck. I'll leave this out of the main navigation. So now I'm going to click add, and this is going to create my page for me. So as I mentioned, it's essentially created a blank page. Now, as a content author, you don't have to worry so much about what exists between the header and the footer, or what's in the header and what's in the footer. As a content author, you're generally responsible for what happens in between those things. So once I've created a new page here again from blank, I've got all these options, different options in order to create or add content to my particular page. So I can add text, I can add a button, I can add images, I can add a video. I can also add some of these other kind of more portal components, which is forms, multi-step forms, lists, Power BI, and I've also got the ability to add spacers and iframes. So this is essentially the WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get interface for developing content in Power Pages. So you can see here I've got a section. Within this section, I can add these different text components. So I'm going to just go text 1. And then as I create these different blocks, I can add more content. I can add another text thing here. Text 2. Okay. So you may notice I'm kind of clicking around here a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily describe this interface as seamless. So it can take a little bit to figure out, where do I click, where do I highlight, where do I have to hover to get these things to pop up. There's definitely a bit of a learning curve to kind of understanding how this editor works. Now, once I've, done this, I have the ability, again, that's going away. So, So once I've selected my text, I've got this, again, what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG editor options to, whether I want to do titles or headings or paragraphs, small text. I can make it bold, I can make it italic, I can make it underlined. I can change the color. These are based on my theme colors. All the things that you kind of expect out of a basic rich text editor in a website building tool. I can also add sections. So you can see here, I've added essentially a number of blocks here to the sections. To that section, I can also add a brand new section. And this is where I can start looking at the different column layouts. So this one right here, we got full column, but I could do a 3-column layout if I'd like. So within each one of those columns, then I can add my various blocks into here. So I can say, hey, I want to add a button here, button to, I don't know, a sports guy. So in Canada, we have TSN. So I'm going to put in https://www.tsn.ca. Click OK, and that's going to add a button here that I can then manage. Maybe in this section, I want to add an image. So I can go in here. I can then pick from my images that I've already uploaded to my Power Pages site. I can also pick between some stock images. I can also just reference an image via URL. And what do we have here under advanced options? Now, if I also have the ability to upload images here. You can see I say upload image. Under the advanced options, I have the option, or I get to choose where, if I upload a new file, where does it reside in the site hierarchy. So when it comes to Power Pages and the hierarchy of the page, other than the home page, every web page needs to have a parent page. And that's what creates basically the tree, the site hierarchy of your particular website. That is also true of web files. So if I happen to upload an image to my Power Pages site, that needs to reside somewhere in the hierarchy or the tree of the site. And so what this is letting me do here is it's letting me decide, if I upload a new image, where in the site hierarchy am I going to upload that image to? So you can see here, it's going to go home. And what's one of the reasons why that's important is you can see, if I then click preview on this particular page, you're going to see that the URL of this page is new-content-page. And so this is that's what's known as that's the URL of the page, and that's generated based on what's known as the partial URL of the page. So I'm going to go into new content page. I'm going to go click here. I'm going to go to page settings, and you can see I have this partial URL. Now, the reason it's called a partial URL is that the URL, the complete URL for any kind of element within Power Pages is its partial URL plus all of the partial URLs of its ancestors. So if a page has a single parent page, then it's going to be the partial URL of it, preceded by the partial URL of the parent page. So what I'm going to do here is, just for fun, I'm going to create a new page here. And okay. So I'm going to move that to main navigation just for a minute. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new subpage. I'm going to say new subpage. I'm going to click add. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to preview. I'm going to go to this particular page, and you will see that its URL will be new subpage, and then in front of that is the partial URL of its parent page. And you can kind of go on and create multiple levels of this content. But it's important to understand that web pages and web files all need to be kind of organized within the site hierarchy. And so the URLs that you use to access those particular resources is based on the partial URLs of that resource and all of its parent pages, grandparent page, and so on and so forth, until you get back up to the home page, and the home page has a partial URL of just /. So if I'm on this new subpage, and why don't I just go back to here? If I'm on here and I want to go add my image, again, I have the option to use one of these already uploaded ones. Do that. I then can modify. I can choose how it's going to be aligned. I can choose if there's any shadow or border or quarter radius, how this image is kind of laid out. So we do have some, again, these WYSIWYG interfaces for controlling images. You saw what we had for buttons. You've seen what we have for text. So this, in kind of a nutshell, is the standard content authoring experience for Power Pages. We basically have the ability to create our new pages. We can upload files if we need to, images and documents, and then we can control the content of the page using this editor. Okay, so I'm going to just flip back to my presentation here. So we've kind of quickly covered the Power Pages Design Studio. Again, that's kind of I would say, Microsoft probably preferred way that you be manage it. That's the interface that they're working on for you to do it. Before Microsoft got their hands on the product and built this Power Pages Design Studio, I want to show you what it used to look like in the ADX Studio days. So if I actually go to my Power Pages site, and so I'm on my Power Pages site, I've logged in as an administrator. If you've ever seen this little box pop up in the top right-hand corner, this tells you you've got front-side editing capabilities. So I'm going to go to my new content page where I've got my content, and you can see I've got the content that I've created in here. Now, you'll see that as I hover over these different elements of the page, I'm getting these little edit buttons pop up. And when I go into here, I can edit the copy or the content of this page. Now, the challenge with using this interface, well, there's a couple challenges, but first of all, you'll notice that all those kind of rich text or the WYSIWYG, all the kind of hover stuff doesn't exist in here. And that's because this interface essentially produces a blob of HTML that gets dropped on the page. And this interface can kind of see that blob, and I can go in here and I can actually edit things in here, but if you look at the HTML for this, it's generating something in a very specific format. So if you go in here and start changing the layout of these things, you're going to lose some of this front-side editing experience here. It's just not going to be, if it's not properly structured, it's not going to work as well in this interface. I'm not going to spend too much time on this legacy front-side editing because it has been deprecated. And in fact, I thought it would be gone already. I thought that they said it was going to be removed back in October. As you can see, it's still here. But I want to mention it just because it has been there a very, very long time. It's probably been there for almost since the beginning of the product. I know I was still at ADX Studio when this kind of front-side editing experience was introduced. So you still will kind of probably run into it, especially if you're kind of watching old blogs and videos and that sort of thing. But I just want to point out that it is not something I would invest any time in just because it has been announced as deprecated, and I thought Microsoft said it was going away. They just may not have turned it off yet, but it is something that isn't really actively worked on, and I do expect it, can literally kind of disappear at any point. So while this historically was a cool way to edit your site, especially kind of back 15 years ago, it was pretty revolutionary to be able to edit your site live as you were working on it. This is something that has been deprecated. So back to my list here. So the next thing on my list is VS Code. So this is where we get a little bit more technical. Now, if someone does content authoring for a living, there's a good chance that they're comfortable with doing some HTML work. And I did show you here how you could get into here and edit the source. Now, again, that's probably, we're not recommending using that interface, but it is possible to edit the source code via this interface as well. And that's by clicking this Edit Code button. This Edit Code is actually an integration with VS Code, Visual Studio Code, and specifically VS Code for web. So it's actually, what it's going to do is it's going to pop open another tab for you that contains the essentially a lot of the files that are used to build your site. I'm going to click Allow here, get it to log in for me, edit the site. And what it's going to do is it's going to load up, here is the HTML for my, let's get Copilot to go away again. Here is that same HTML that we were looking at before. Again, we've got the same kind of caveat about these, this format. We want to stick with this format if you are wanting the content to still be kind of well structured over here, so that it's still going to work properly in this front side or within the design studio. So this, again, all of the content for a page is stored in one kind of big blob of HTML. In this editor, that blob of HTML is kind of basically read in, and assuming it kind of fits the format, they'll be able to display all these kind of fancy edit controls for you. But if you start kind of going here and changing some of these things, it's possible that this interface isn't going to necessarily recognize the format anymore. So while you won't necessarily lose your content, you may lose some of these richer experiences for building out your pages. So this VS Code integration is super awesome for, it also gives you access to add custom JavaScript, custom CSS, again, the HTML content. Not only can we get at the web pages, but we can get at lists and forms and content snippets and web files and web templates. All of this becomes accessible from the VS Code integration. If you are a fan of having VS Code installed on your local computer, you can also do that. That is, there's a tool for the Power Apps, the Power Platform command line interface known as the PAC CLI. There are Power Pages commands in the CLI tool that allow you to download, essentially gives you a download of these files that you can have on your local computer, and then there's a command that after you've edited them, you can push them back. So if you want to use VS Code on your local computer, you can also do that. Okay, so the thing is that not everything you could possibly want to do is built out in this design studio. So you can imagine when Microsoft acquired this product from ADX Studio, primarily the way that people were managing their Power Pages sites was via a model-driven app. ADX Studio had built functionality into a model, well, back then it wasn't a model-driven app, but that's what it is today. So ADX Studio built this functionality into a model-driven app for you to manage essentially all of the aspects of the site. And slowly but surely, Microsoft has been adding those capabilities into the Design Studio. Now, again, not everything is there, so that we still have to resort back to that old model-driven app. And we can do that by clicking the ellipse here and clicking Portal Management. That's going to open up a model-driven app that contains the vast majority, other than what's in the Admin Center, the Power Platform Admin Center. This gives you kind of full control over the content that appears on your Power Pages site. So again, we can go into web pages. We're going to see the same web pages that we did. Now, in my particular environment, we have multiple Power Pages sites. So you can see that we've got a whole lot of web pages in here. Oop, I didn't want to do that. I was just going to do some filtering here. And I'm just going to filter by the one we were looking at. So as we look in here, we're going to see the page that I created. Because as I mentioned earlier, all of the data that we're creating in Power Pages, when we're creating web pages, when we're creating web files, that's all creating data directly into Dataverse. So this model-driven app is just looking at Dataverse, and I'm able to look at the content that I've created. So you can see here, I've got the new content page, I've got the new subpage created as rows in Dataverse. So if I were to open up one of these, I could look at my content page. I can see all the various options that I have. Honestly, quite a few more options in here than I can in the Design Studio. Now, just because there's a lot more options in here, they're not necessarily as widely used. So that's why Microsoft hasn't necessarily kind of put in the effort to make all of these available in the Design Studio. There's a lot you can do in the Design Studio. It's just not totally migrated over there. One of the reasons I wanted to move into the model-driven app was to show you, or quickly talk about multilingual. So when we talk about content authors, and I mean, I kind of hope you never have to be in this situation, because multilingual is like, it's not usually a whole lot of fun. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's often not a lot of fun to create a site that has to be multilingual when you have to, you have to get all the text translated, and you have to kind of build it in a specific way to support that. But Power Pages does have a multilingual content model. So the way that works is that so I'll look at my new content page here. You can see that this is a web page that actually has what's known as a localized page as well. So if my Power Pages site was enabled for, say, 2 languages. In Canada, if you have 2 languages, it's generally going to be English and French. So every page will have at least 2 web pages for it. You'll have what's known as the root page, which is kind of the group, the page that kind of groups all of the languages together, and then you'll have 1 page per language. In my case, I'm just using English, so I only have a single localized page. But if I had French, what I'd have my new content root page, as they call it, and then there would be 2 localized pages, one for French and one for English. So that is a data model that Microsoft created themselves. The ADX Studio product that they acquired had a different way of doing multilingual, but within Power Pages, the multilingual experience is by creating these different localized pages per language for each of the root web pages. One of the reasons I want to talk about this is that you'll notice that if I go back to the Design Studio, there's really not much of there's no kind of concept of language in here. So the managing of the different websites is primarily done, through the management app. Yeah, again, within the management app, we've got access to things like web link sets if we wanted to edit those. Again, we've got web files. So pretty much anything you can do over here in the Design Studio, you can do over here in the management app. But generally, the interface in the management app is, it's a little bit more basic, a little bit more out-of-the-box model-driven app versus some of the nice fancier UI. So in here, like this whole kind of WYSIWYG, building with blocks in here. None of that exists in the management app. So if I were to go into my web page, if I were to look for new content, if I were to open that up, and then if I were to open up the actual localized page where my content is, because it's in English, the actual content here, again, we're just looking at the HTML for it, so similar to accessing it via the VS Code integration. Okay, time check. Okay, 12:43. Okay, so we've covered the Power Pages Design Studio. We've talked about the legacy front-side editor, VS Code, either via the PAX CLI or for the web. We've talked about the management model-driven app. The other thing I want to shout out would be the portal code editor for the XRM Toolbox. So hopefully everyone knows about the XRM Toolbox. If not, go learn about that because it's an invaluable collection of tools for the Power Platform. Tanguy, the guy who created the XRM Toolbox, also has created this plugin for the XRM Toolbox called the Portal Code Editor. So this was like the go-to tool for many, many, many years. It's similar now. It offers similar functionality that the VS Code integration has. So if we look at, I've got my NHPAP portal here. I have the ability to go into the web pages and I can find, I'm just going to do a refresh here to find my new content page. Web pages, my new content page, English, I've got my content here. So there's that same HTML that we've been talking about, JavaScript, CSS. So again, similar to the VS Code integration with getting access to those elements. Obviously, if you know, lots of people, they live within the XRM Toolbox, that's where they're getting most of their work done. So this is a great tool if that's kind of your primary workspace where you can edit things in Power Pages as well. Okay. So those are some of the options for editing your content in Power Pages. Again, the primary way of doing it these days is the Power Pages Design Studio. You know, I come from a kind of a pro code background. I'm building my own HTML from scratch. So honestly, I'm not using that WYSIWYG editor as much as some other people might be. So I'm, you know, my main interface these days is the VS Code integration for VS Code for web, where I can just get in there and get my hands dirty with the HTML and kind of get it exactly how I'm looking for. Okay, so let's move on to our next section here. So how does content make ALM tricky? So we've talked about, you know, you can create new pages, you can update the text on page, you can add content, add images, all that sort of stuff. So what does this do to our ALM process? So I guess what do I mean by ALM? So in this particular context, I'm referring to moving our work from a dev environment to a test environment, to UAT, to prod, whatever all the different environments that you have are. We generally want to work in dev and then deploy to upstream environments so that various stakeholder groups can test it out and then finally deploy to production. However, when it comes to actual content, often content doesn't follow this process. That doesn't mean it can't, but if you've built someone a website that you've said kind of has content management functionality, and then you say, hey, if you want to change a word on the website, that means you're going to have to get someone to do it in dev, and then we're going to have to go to a deployment to test, and then we're going to deploy that one word change to UAT, and then we're going to deploy it to production. They might look at you a little sideways, because often the expectation is that those types of content changes are made kind of directly on the site. It's a live site with a content management system, and they think I should be able to make those changes directly on the site. I shouldn't have to go through a whole ALM process to create a new page or update a picture or add a new blog post or whatever it is, right? That should just be done directly in production. And some organizations may want it to follow that whole process. Some organizations, maybe not from dev, but maybe they'll want to have it in a staging environment, at least to test the content. That's fine. But in general, your content is often not going to follow the exact process that your typical code might do. Or if you're building out functionality in your portal, it's often going to follow a different process than what your content will do. And so that would be all and well if it was very easy to say, hey, this is my content and this is my code, and okay, I'll just deploy the stuff that is my code, and the content can be just done in production. The problem is that often content and code are mixed together. So for today's sake, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define code as essentially the stuff that we wouldn't want our content authors to be modifying. So there may be some HTML on, or say in our header or in our footer, that we are not wanting our content authors to modify. So we kind of look at our website and we kind of pick the different regions on the page where we do want the content authors to have control, and then there may be other parts of the page where we don't want those content authors to have the control because they're, maybe it's an area that we're displaying a message generated by the system. So if they went in there and changed the HTML, maybe they're going to remove an ID or a CSS class that our code is depending on. So there can be a mix of, hey, here's the HTML for a page. There's some words on the page that we do want the author to change, but maybe the ID of the div around that content can't change. So that's what I'm talking about, having a mix of code and content all mixed together. And how do we deploy this? Again, assuming that potentially that code that content could be updated directly in production. So what you have in dev may not be the most up-to-date information in terms of content. So if you always push from dev, you may overwrite content that's been updated in production. So, I mean, the short answer is you have to have it takes careful planning to figure out and to separate your content from your code. So essentially, you have to always be thinking as a developer, and this is what we'll talk about on Thursday, is as a developer, how do I make it so any of the code that I'm writing that contains content is how do I make that so that someone else can manage it? Because we don't want for every word that needs to change to necessarily come back to the developer. So exactly how you do that depends on your ALM strategy. There are different tools for doing Power Pages ALM, and Power Pages ALM in itself is an entire, you could spend a whole week just on that. And we will dive a little bit more into this kind of content versus code concept on Thursday. But I just want to kind of touch on that right now to say, at a very high level, we have to very carefully plan how we have our code versus our content, and then that plan is informed by what is our actual ALM strategy. Because if we're using solutions can only move entire rows of data. If we're using the configuration migration tool, that tool has a little bit more granular control. We can include certain columns or not certain columns, and again, we'll talk about that on Thursday. So ALM is tricky because you can't just move over your entire site generally. Generally, there are bits of your content that are updated directly in production, so dev is not necessarily in sync. And so if you were to deploy everything from your dev environment, you're going to overwrite the new content in production. And so to solve that, we generally have to kind of separate content from code and be very careful about what we push between the environments. And again, we'll talk more about that on Thursday. Okay. Let's talk about how Copilot can help us. Because honestly, what I find to be one of the hardest parts about building Power Pages site is writing the content, especially like if you're doing demos or proof of concepts, putting in some maybe not perfect content but realistic content can really kind of make or break the proof of concept or the demo. Lorem ipsum just doesn't cut it these days. Having some realistic content in there can make the people who are viewing that, it feels like their thing versus some just random example that you might have come up with. So what can Copilot do to help? Copilot can help us generate all sorts of different types of content. So Copilot can actually generate for us an entire site. We can tell Copilot when we're going to create a site, we can say, hey, this is the site I want you describe for Copilot what you want, and it can actually provision a brand new Power Pages site. Let's assume that you've already got a site created. Copilot can still help. It can generate an entire page. You can say, hey, Copilot, create me a page that describes X, Y, and Z, and it can do that. It can add sections. It can also add specifically a text in a specific block. So if you're on a page and you've got like a couple paragraphs that you need to add and you just can't figure out the wording of it, you can say, hey, Copilot, give me a description about this, and it will generate that content for you. So let's take a quick peek as to how that looks. We'll start with the generating an entire site. So I'm going to go back here to my make.powerpages.microsoft.com, and you can see when you go in here and say, hey, I want to create a new site, they can say, hey, we'll start with a template, or we can start from blank, or you put it in here. So I could say, make me a site that allows me to manage a golf course. I'm a golf nut, and so all my examples involve golf. So off it can go. It's going to come back here, and it's going to essentially propose, hey, what do we want to call it? So it's calling it Golf Course Manager. I can edit this if I want a course, and it's giving it a URL. Then it's going to give me a layout, a proposed layout. And you can see here it's picked an image here that has to do with golf. It's coming up with some text. It's coming up with a layout here. All of this automatically generated by Copilot. And if I don't really like what it's done here, I can say, try again. I just got to try a little harder the second time. There we go. So you can see here now it's talking about course management, tee time booking, equipment rental. It's an interesting choice for graphic, but let's say I'm happy with this one. So I can click next. Then it's going to give me a bunch of different content, common pages that I might want to pick. And I can say, yeah, I do want events. Yeah, I want membership. Yes, I want all these different things. And I can select which pages I want to add to my site. So basically a step-by-step wizard of creating a Power Pages site based on recommendations from Copilot. Now, I don't actually want to create this. So I'm just going to discard. I'm going to go back into my, so the other functionality that we talked about was, once I've already got a site. So let's assume I've got my site here. I can go into my Copilot pane, and you can see here there's a bunch of things that I can ask it to do. Now, it can actually create forms and lists. We've talked about how that's not quite what we're going after today, but we can get it to do pages. So I can say, hey, I want to create a page. Create a page that describes golf courses. And I can say go. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a new page for me with content, probably some images. It usually has some images in there. There we go. There's, you can see it's done a layout with a couple of columns here, 3 columns down here, and created an entire page for me. Now, if I go back to, I'm going to discard that. Not actually going to add that to my site for now. But if I go into this content page, I can also have it generate sections for me. The other thing I can do is if I create a new text area, and I click Copilot here, I can say, write me a paragraph about how great golf is. So I do that here. So it generates this paragraph. I can say, try again. And then I can say, I like this, but make it a little friendlier. And you know what? Let's make it a little bit longer. And yeah, I kind of like that. So I'm going to add that to the page. Now, of course, with anything AI generated, you need to proofread it. It's rarely going to be absolutely perfect. But if I was doing a demo about a golf course, having some real content in there that actually contains the word golf and not lorem ipsum is, I think, going to really take that demo to the next level. Once I have text in there, even if it was existing text not generated by Copilot, I can say, do you know what? Make that a little shorter for me. And say, yep, replace the text with that. I can even go back in and say, do you know what? Make it even a little shorter. And I can say replace text, and there it is a little bit shorter. So using Copilot, we can get it to generate entire sites. We can get it to generate pages, sections, and the actual text on the site. I know for me, I'm not much of a writer, so having Copilot help me with some of that text generation is an awesome feature. Okay, we are at time here. So again, on Thursday, we're going to do a deeper dive into how we separate the content from the code and how we can do ALM. I think we've got about 2 minutes here, but and happy to answer any questions if there are. If not, I hope to see you all on Thursday, where we'll continue our dive into content and ALM.
This was awesome, Nick. Thank you so much for doing your walkthrough. I think for folks who have been exposed to Power Pages, you may have seen bits and pieces in this particular format, but it was a nice refresher of the options related to content altering. I hope I'll have all my team's issues fixed before the next lesson. I don't know what happened, but cool thing is, I had a chance to broadcast the same lesson as it's going live to LinkedIn, and we had a lot of people joining there and the other channels as well. So it kind of opened a new realm of possibilities here. So, good. Thank you for that, Nick.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and hopefully see you on Thursday.
All right. Take care. And if you have questions that we were not able to capture during this time, you can private message me or Nicholas, and we'll do our best to respond. All right. So we'll see you on Thursday at the same time, and this time we'll be able to record through Teams. All right. Hopefully. Take care. Bye-bye.